Before we dig any deeper into the Engine API, let's talk about another of the core concepts in more detail: generic objects. Every object type in the Qlik engine is considered a generic object and will differ in structure based on what it represents. The engine will understand how to treat a generic object based on that structure. Properties that the engine understands begin with a lowercase q, for example QType or QHandle. Any unrecognized properties, whether they begin with a Q or not, will be ignored and are most likely meant for use in the client. Now the great thing about this is that you can create brand new object types specific to your needs, and the engine will treat them like any other. Let's look at the structure of an example generic object. All objects need a QInfo section, which stores the ID and type of the generic object. If we don't specify the QID, the engine will create it for us. The QType property, however, must exist. The value itself is not important as long as it's there and provides us with a mechanism to understand what to do with that object in the application we're building. In the QlikSense client, for example, a generic object may have a QType of bar chart. The engine doesn't do anything based on the value bar chart. However, once the object has been created, the client can use that to determine how to visualize that particular object. As we mentioned earlier, all properties that start with Q are properties that the engine understands. The value QSelectionObjectDef, for example, will be recognized by the engine and evaluated accordingly when required. We can also see that the definition has a tags and a color property, which the engine will ignore from a calculation perspective, but they will persist with the object and can be used in our client code. Here are a few example properties that the engine will use. Let's start by building a very simple generic object definition with a QType of myObject. We'll then add a property to it called myProperty and include a QString expression. We'll also add two further properties to demonstrate how the engine treats items it doesn't recognize. To have the engine use this definition, we can create a session object. A session object is a generic object that only exists for the lifetime of a single session. It disappears when the session is closed or if it's destroyed programmatically, but it will still benefit from all of the caching features available in the engine. To create a session object, we use the createSessionObject method on the app class, passing in the generic object definition as a parameter. The resulting promise provides us with an object that represents the generic object class, which we'll refer to as the model. Being generic, this class contains a very large list of methods which may or may not be applicable, depending on the Q properties that were used in the definition. Here are some of the methods we'll be looking at in this course. Our model exposes the functionality of the object, but it doesn't actually contain any data. In addition, the engine hasn't performed any calculations either. It simply registered the object and is now awaiting further instruction. To get data, we need to call the getLayout method on the object. The contents of the layout will vary depending on the definition we provided. For our example, it would look like this. Notice how the QString expression has been evaluated and the result promoted to be the value of myProperty. The QInfo section now has an ID, and the other unrecognized properties were left untouched. The engine will only perform a task when it has been instructed to do so, which gives us greater control over the performance when compared to the capability APIs, for example. We'll learn more about this throughout the course.
You can stay up to date with all of our content by subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on social media. If you'd like to see more from this course, then head over to websy.academy, where you'll find our full set of training courses complete with hands-on activities and much more.